Hello and welcome to another edition of Another Book Review. This week I'll be reviewing Rebekah Frumkin's debut novel, The Comedown. I'll talk a little bit about the author, go into a brief, spoiler-free sketch of the plot, talk about what I liked about the book, what I didn't like about the book, who I would recommend the book to, and finally talk about what I will be reading for next week. So Rebekah Frumkin is a graduate of the Iowa Writers Workshop. She's also known for articles and essays written in McSweeney's as well as other publications. Like I said before, this is her debut novel. So The Comedown is about two families whose histories become interwoven after the two patriarchs of the family are involved in a crime gone wrong in 1970s Cleveland. And the rest of the novel is structured so that you get a couple early chapters of the two main characters, who the rest of the book kind of revolves around. And then from that point forward until the very end of the novel, you get chapters where other people and their families are the kind of spotlight characters, for lack of a better term. So these could be spouses, these could be children, these could be significant others of the children, things of that nature. So what I liked about the book was that in that structure, I think it gave the author the ability to talk about different generations of people, and I think she definitely used that structure to do so. The way most of the chapters worked they were typically split in half, where one of the chapters was typically, the first half of the chapter, was typically an earlier event, probably closer to the 1970s, kind of the incident in question, and then it would fast forward into time. So you kind of got to see two different points of time for kind of each of the characters in the vast majority of cases, unless the character was relatively young. Speaking of which, I think she did a good job of writing about more modern characters. There's a couple of characters who are in high school during the events of the book, and I think she did a good job of capturing how high schoolers of today are maybe a little bit different than people in the past. So there was a really good capturing of that. As far as the writing style, the usage, and things like that, I think she did very well in that. I didn't have a problem with necessarily the word choice. There were some times where she included some slang, and I think it was used just enough to evoke the atmosphere of the book, but it didn't really get bogged down to where you had to go to a dictionary to really understand what was happening. Overall, I had a hard time with this book. I will say some of the things that I didn't like as much. I thought the two kind of patriarchs were the most interesting part in kind of their relationship and the incident in question that happens early in the book. I'm trying to stay relatively spoiler-free. It involves a briefcase of money, and the rest of the book kind of travels. As you travel through the book, you're kind of wondering, the mystery is what happened to this briefcase full of money. That I thought was interesting. I thought that was an interesting hook. The problem is, as the book kind of went along, you got both chronologically and as far as the history of these characters, the two main characters, you got further and further away from them. So I had a hard time with that. All the characters in the novel are unlikable. I think it's fair to say that the vast majority of them are despicable characters. They don't really invoke a lot of empathy. I think my biggest problem with the plot was that as you're kind of following this money along, you get to kind of the realization that the money ultimately doesn't matter in the lives of a lot of these characters. It's not going to drastically change their lives or make them better people. Also, it felt like, especially towards the end of the novel, there were characters who may have been better suited to be in a different work almost. They felt like they almost didn't fit into this book. And that really, to me, the biggest frustration, I think, was the last 100 pages or so of the novel felt like a slog. It's not necessarily that long of a novel, but the last 100 pages seemed to take forever. Those are my main complaints. It didn't necessarily come from a writing perspective. I just didn't feel that the characters were very likable or interesting, and a lot of what they didn't necessarily tie into a theme. Some of them felt out of place. So it was a very ambitious novel. Like I said, there are probably, 9 or 10 main characters in this, and I think she does a good job of juggling them as best as she can, but ultimately it didn't really pack a punch for me. I was left kind of underwhelmed. I thought that there were some plot points that were questionable at times. So that is the book, The Comedown. If you did enjoy this book, please post below and let me know what I may have missed, because I had kind of a hard time getting into it and really enjoying it. It reminded me a lot of other books that I've read that I liked more. So you do get the way that the kind of stories are interwoven in a similar way to Visit from the Goon Squad, which I've reviewed earlier for this channel. You get kind of the object that travels through time as the characters are chasing it or looking for it, similar to Don DeLillo's Underworld and White Teeth. Reminded me of White Teeth as far as these two families that become kind of mixed up in each other's businesses. And yeah, so those are the books that it reminded me of. I'd recommend checking those books out before this one. I will say, if you're someone who is sensitive to certain things, I've seen this novel described as a dark comedy, and I didn't see that. I've reviewed books in the past that are maybe a little too dark for my taste, like Pygmy, which I've reviewed for this channel, where at least I saw what the author was trying to go for and was trying to be funny. I didn't necessarily get that with this book. It did not feel funny to me. Sensitive subjects, just as a warning, there is a suicide, there is a suicide attempt, there's constant drug use throughout the novel, there is infidelity, I'm trying to think of anything else that would be there's a character who, one of the things I think she did handle well before I end the video, there's a character who's, I guess, would be gender fluid is the way it would be described. I thought the way that character is handled well. The problem is they don't necessarily, in my opinion, didn't really fit into the rest of the book. It didn't really ultimately matter, that part of their history. There's also a plot point with that character that I think makes less sense in the recent past here, 2008, than it would have made sense in 1998 or 1978. But that's more of a minor quibble. But I would just make a note, if you are someone who's sensitive to things of that nature, this may be a book that you may want to avoid. So for next time, I'm going to be reading The Farm by Tom Rob Smith, the author of Child 44. And until next time, please, if you enjoyed this, like the video, subscribe to the channel. I'll also have a link to my Twitter below, as well as links to the other videos that I have reviewed in the past that I mentioned in this video. So until next time, bye.